The money in your wallet is worth less today than it was yesterday. Not because you spent it, not because it's damaged or old, but because someone, somewhere, decided it should be. You can't see it happening. There's no bill in the mail, no line item on your receipt, no government form to sign. But every single time you use money to buy groceries, pay rent, save for the future, you're paying a tax that no one voted for, that no politician will admit exists, and that most people will never understand. It's called inflation, and it's the most profitable, invisible, and ancient form of taxation ever invented. This isn't a story about economics. It's a story about power, about how governments learned, thousands of years ago, that they could take your wealth without ever touching your wallet. About how a trick born in the smoke and shadows of ancient mints became the foundation of every modern economy. And about why, no matter how hard you work or how much you save, you're always running on a treadmill that's speeding up beneath your feet. The system is designed this way, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let's start with a simple question. What is money? Most people would say it's a store of value, a way to preserve your labor, your time, your effort. You work, you earn, you save, and someday, when you need it, that money will still be there, waiting, reliable, unchanged. But that's not how it works. Not anymore. Not for a very long time. Money today is a promise, and promises, as history shows, can be broken. The secret tax you pay isn't written into law. It's woven into the very fabric of currency itself. Every time a government prints more money, every time a central bank expands the money supply, the value of every dollar, euro, or yen already in existence quietly shrinks. Your savings lose purchasing power. Your salary buys less. The price of bread, of housing, of life itself rises, not because things became more valuable, but because money became less so. And here's the revelation. This isn't an accident. It's a feature. The story begins in ancient Rome, in the dying days of an empire that once ruled the known world. Picture the year 200 AD. Rome is vast, powerful, decadent, but it's also bleeding. Wars on every frontier, corruption in every office, and a treasury that's running dry. The emperors faced a problem as old as power itself. How do you pay for an empire when you're out of money? They couldn't raise taxes any higher. The people were already on the edge of revolt. They couldn't cut spending. The army demanded its wages, and without the army, there was no emperor. So they did something clever, something that would echo through the centuries and become the blueprint for every government that followed. They debased the currency. Roman coins, for centuries, had been made of pure silver, solid, reliable, trusted across continents. But the emperors discovered a trick. They could melt down the old coins, mix the silver with cheap base metals like copper or tin, and mint new coins that looked almost identical. Same size, same stamp, same imperial seal. But inside, less silver, less value, less truth. At first, the change was subtle. A 10% reduction in silver content, then 20%, then 50%. By the time of Emperor Gallienus in the 260s AD, Roman coins contained less than 5% silver. They were tokens, symbols, lies wrapped in metal. And here's what happened. Prices exploded. A measure of wheat that cost 8 denarii in the year 200 AD cost 120,000 denarii a century later. Not because wheat became more valuable, but because the denarii became worthless. The Roman government had discovered the secret tax. They printed money, not with paper, but with diluted metal. And every citizen holding old coins, every merchant with a stash of savings, every soldier promised a pension, paid the price. The empire didn't collapse because of barbarians. It collapsed because the money died first. Fast forward 1,000 years. The trick hasn't disappeared. It's evolved. Medieval Europe. A patchwork of kingdoms, each with its own currency, each with its own mint, and in every mint the same temptation whispered. Kings called it crying up the coinage, a poetic phrase for an ancient theft. Here's how it worked. A king would decree that old coins were no longer valid. Citizens had to bring them to the royal mint to be exchanged for new ones. But the new coins? Lighter, less gold, less silver. The difference went straight into the royal treasury. The king spent the same. But the people's wealth quietly evaporated. In England, in France, in Spain, everywhere the pattern repeated. Monarchs discovered they could wage wars, build palaces, and reward loyalists without ever asking Parliament for permission or raising a single official tax. They just made the money worth less. And the people? They paid. In higher prices, in diminished savings, in a slow, invisible erosion of everything they'd worked for. Sound familiar? Then came the age of paper money, and the secret tax became invisible. For most of human history, money was physical. Gold, silver, copper. You could hold it, weigh it, test it. If a king tried to debase it, you'd eventually notice. The coins would feel lighter, look different. Word would spread. But paper changed everything. In 1694, the Bank of England was founded with a radical idea. Money didn't need to be made of precious metal. It could be printed on paper, backed by a promise. A promise that, if you wanted, you could exchange that paper for real gold or silver. At first, the system worked. Banks were careful. Governments were restrained. The promise held. But promises are fragile things, and the temptation to break them is constant. By the 20th century, every major government had learned the lesson Rome taught. When you control the money supply, you control everything. World War I was the turning point. Governments needed to finance unprecedented destruction. Millions of soldiers, endless artillery, years of stalemate and slaughter. Taxes alone couldn't pay for it. Borrowing had limits, so they did what empires always do. They inflated. Germany printed marks by the billions. France printed francs. Britain printed pounds. The printing presses ran day and night, churning out currency to pay for bullets and bombs. And when the war ended, the bills came due. In Germany, the result was Weimar hyperinflation. A loaf of bread cost 200 billion marks. Workers were paid twice a day because money lost value by the hour. People burned currency in their stoves because it was cheaper than firewood. The life savings of an entire generation, gone. Not stolen by thieves. Not lost to bad investments. Erased by their own government's printing press. The secret tax had become a weapon of mass destruction. Here's the mechanism, laid bare. Imagine you live in a small village. There are 100 gold coins in circulation. You own 10 of them, 10% of all the money that exists. You're relatively wealthy. One night, the village leader secretly mints 100 new coins. By morning, there are 200 coins in circulation. You still have your 10, but now you own just 5% of the money supply. Your share of the village's wealth has been cut in half. Nothing was taken from you directly. No one robbed your home. But you've been taxed all the same. This is inflation, not rising prices. That's the symptom. Inflation is the expansion of the money supply. And every time it happens, everyone holding money loses a piece of their wealth. Governments and central banks call it monetary policy. They say it stimulates the economy, fights unemployment, manages growth. And sometimes, in small doses, maybe it does. But here's what they don't say. Inflation is a transfer of wealth, from savers to borrowers, from citizens to governments, from the future to the present. When a government prints money, it gets to spend that money first, at yesterday's prices. By the time it filters through the economy and prices rise, the government has already bought what it needed. And you? You're left holding currency that buys less than it did before. It's taxation without legislation, theft without crime, a magic trick performed in broad daylight, and it never stops. The consequences ripple through history like cracks in ice. The French Revolution wasn't just about bread shortages and aristocratic excess. It was about assignats, paper currency printed to fund a bankrupt government. Within 5 years, the assignat lost 99% of its value. The rage that followed toppled a monarchy. The collapse of the Soviet Union wasn't just about political ideology. The ruble was worthless. Store shelves were empty, not because there was no food, but because no one would accept the money. Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Argentina, Turkey, the pattern repeats with eerie precision. Governments spend beyond their means. They can't or won't raise taxes. So they print. And the people pay the secret tax until the currency collapses entirely. But the most haunting part? Even after collapse, even after hyperinflation destroys a nation, the lesson is never learned. Because the temptation is too great, the power too intoxicating. Why ask citizens for money through taxes, a politically painful process that requires transparency and accountability, when you can simply expand the money supply and take it invisibly? Every empire in history has chosen the easy path. Every single one. And every single one has paid the price. Now, let's talk about today. Since 1971, when President Nixon severed the last link between the dollar and gold, every major currency on Earth has been fiat money. Money backed by nothing but government decree, nothing but faith. And since 1971, the money supply has exploded. In the United States, the M2 money supply, a measure of cash and easily accessible money, has grown from $600 billion to over $21 trillion. That's a 3,400% increase in just over 50 years. Your salary might have doubled in that time, maybe tripled if you're lucky. But the money supply? It's grown 34 times over. This is why housing costs have skyrocketed, why college tuition has become a lifetime burden, why a single income no longer supports a family the way it did for your grandparents. Not because the world became more expensive, but because the money became less valuable. You feel it every time you buy groceries, every time you fill your gas tank, every time you look at your retirement account and wonder if it'll be enough. The system is working exactly as designed. Just not for you. Central banks call it quantitative easing, monetary stimulus, liquidity injection. The language is technical, sanitized, designed to obscure what's really happening. They're expanding the money supply. They're inflating. They're collecting the secret tax. And unlike income tax, you can't avoid it. You can't hire an accountant to find loopholes. You can't move to a lower tax bracket. If you hold currency, if you save in dollars, euros, yen, you pay. The only way to escape is to understand the game and play it differently. Here's the truth they won't tell you. Inflation benefits debtors and punishes savers. Governments are the biggest debtors on earth. The U.S. government owes over $36 trillion. Japan owes more than twice its annual GDP. Every developed nation is drowning in debt. And inflation is how they escape. When you owe money, inflation is your friend. If you borrow $100,000 today and inflation runs at 3% per year, in a decade, you're paying back that loan with money that's worth 25% less. The debt shrinks in real terms. You win. But if you're a saver, if you worked hard, spent less than you earned, and put money aside for the future, inflation is your enemy. That nest egg loses value every single year. The purchasing power of your savings erodes. You lose. This is the hidden bargain at the heart of the modern economy. Governments want inflation because it reduces their debt burden. Banks want inflation because it keeps people borrowing. The system is built to reward spending and punish saving. And the secret tax? It funds the whole operation. So what do you do with this knowledge? First, you stop thinking of money as a safe place to store value. It's not. It never was. Money is a tool, useful for transactions, but corrosive over time. History shows that real wealth isn't held in currency. It's held in assets that can't be inflated away. Land, commodities, productive businesses, things with intrinsic value that exist outside the monetary system. The wealthy have always known this. That's why they own property, stocks, gold, art, anything but piles of cash. Because cash is designed to lose value. That's the point. Second, you understand the game. Every time you hear a central bank announce new stimulus, know what's really happening. Every time you see prices rise and politicians blame corporations or foreign nations, look deeper. The cause is almost always the same. More money chasing the same goods. The secret tax at work. And third, and this is crucial, you don't despair. You adapt. The system is rigged, yes, but it's not invisible anymore. You see it now, and once you see it, you can navigate it. You can make decisions that protect your wealth instead of decisions that erode it. You can stop being a victim of the secret tax and start being someone who understands how money actually works. Empires rise and fall. Currencies come and go, but the pattern remains. Governments will always be tempted to print, to inflate, to collect the secret tax, because it's easier than the alternative, easier than discipline, easier than hard choices, easier than asking citizens to pay directly for the life they want to live. Rome debased its coins. Medieval kings cried up their coinage. Weimar Germany printed until the currency was worthless. And today, central banks expand the money supply with a keystroke. The technology changes. The mechanism stays the same. You are paying a tax. Every day. Every transaction. Every moment you hold currency instead of assets. But now you know. And knowledge is the first step toward freedom. The secret tax isn't a conspiracy. It's a feature of every monetary system in history. The question isn't whether you'll pay it. The question is whether you'll understand what's being taken and what you can do about it. History doesn't repeat. It reveals. And if you understand the past, you'll see the future more clearly.